Republican Darren Bailey announced today he will stay in the race for governor after losing several family members in a helicopter accident last month. In a Facebook post, Bailey said his decision comes after much reflection and prayer. He says his son Zach and daughter-in-law, quote, believed in an Illinois where families could build a future. They believed the state could do better. Bailey also said he was inspired by President Donald Trump to keep fighting, even as he grieves the loss of his 4 family members, including 2 grandkids, in a helicopter crash October 22nd in Montana.